Her home burned to ashes in a single night, yet from those flames, a love would rise strong enough to defy death itself. Montana Territory, 1882. The world of Clara Wynn vanished in smoke and screams when a stray lantern turned her family's homestead into a pyre. Alone and penniless, she wandered the frost-bitten streets of Pinneridge, clutching a half-burned locket, the last relic of the life she'd lost. But fate, cruel and strange, wasn't done with her yet. Ethan Cole, a weathered cowboy with a haunted past, found her sitting outside the general store, her eyes hollow as winter glass. He offered her work at the Iron Creek Ranch, a place of hard men, unspoken rules, and secrets buried deeper than the frost line. She thought he was just her savior. He thought she was a soul to protect. But when a letter from Helena revealed her father's hidden fortune, and a band of ruthless men came hunting for it, the two were thrown into a perilous journey through blizzards, betrayal, and bullets. Somewhere between survival and surrender, they would learn that love can be forged like iron hammered by loss, tested by danger, and reborn from ashes. And before their story ends, one of them will have to make the ultimate choice: protect the home they built together, or burn it all to keep the other alive. The smoke of Pinneridge still lingered in the air when Clara Wynn arrived, just another stranger with soot on her face and grief in her eyes. The town sat crouched against the edge of the Montana plains, a scattering of wooden buildings half swallowed by endless sky. Wagons rattled down the frozen street, and wind carried dust and rumor in equal measure. Men spoke little here. Women worked hard, prayed harder, and learned not to ask questions about the pasts of those who rode in from the horizon. On the third morning after the fire, Clara sat on the steps of the general store, staring at the ashes still embedded in her hands. The bite of the cold didn't matter. The ache inside her was colder. Every sound, the ring of a hammer from the blacksmith, the jingle of spurs, the far-off whinny of a horse, felt like echoes from another life. That was when Ethan Cole appeared. He was tall, sun-scarred, the kind of man the West carved out of stubborn will and silent pain. His duster coat was worn, his eyes sharp as the wind. He looked at her not with pity, but recognition, like one soul recognizing another bruised by loss. "I could use a hand at Iron Creek," he said simply. "Cooking, cleaning, nothing fancy. Comes with a roof and meals." Clara hesitated. She had nothing left to lose, and yet something in his gaze promised a danger different from hunger or cold. She took his hand anyway. By nightfall, she rode beside him into a land where the sky turned blood red at sunset, and where every man and woman carried secrets like loaded guns. The wagon creaked through a land of silence and wind. By the time the sun dipped behind the jagged ridges of Iron Creek, Clara could no longer feel her fingers. The ranch appeared suddenly from the twilight, a fortress of timber and stone surrounded by miles of snow-brushed prairie. Smoke rose from chimneys. Horses stamped in the corral, and the men, broad, tired, and watchful, paused to stare at the newcomer beside Ethan Cole. Inside the main house, warmth met her like a blow. The scent of firewood and stew filled the air, but so did a tension she couldn't name. At the head of the long table sat Jedediah Ward, the ranch owner, a man whose eyes could measure truth like weight on a scale. "You brought us a lady, Cole," he said with a tone halfway between suspicion and amusement. "Housekeeper," Ethan answered evenly. "We're short since Mrs. Green left for Billings." Clara kept her chin high, though her heart thundered. "I can cook, clean, and keep to myself," she said softly. Ward studied her a long moment before nodding. "We'll see if that's true come supper." Later that night, after feeding a dozen hungry men and earning a rare word of approval from Ward, Clara stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the flames. For the first time since the fire, she felt something that almost resembled safety. Then Ethan's shadow filled the doorway. "You did good tonight," he said quietly. "Thank you," she murmured. But before he turned away, his eyes flicked toward the window, out into the darkness beyond. "There are things out here," he said, voice low. "Not all of them friendly. If trouble comes, trust me first." And from that moment, trouble was already on its way. Dawn at Iron Creek came with a silver edge of frost, and the kind of quiet that made a person listen for what wasn't there. Clara woke to the low murmur of cowhands saddling up, the scrape of a shovel outside the kitchen door, the coppery scent of blood from a steer butchered before sunup. She pulled her shawl close and began the choreography of survival. Coffee first, then biscuits, then stew that could sit and deepen while men brought in the day. By the time the sky turned the color of old pewter, the main house was warm and busy. Boots scuffed the plank floor. Men drifted through, trading jokes and weather-laced predictions. No one asked about her past. No one offered theirs. It suited the West that way. Ethan appeared last, like he always did, never first to take, never last to leave. He nodded to her. A glance like a calloused hand brushed across silk. Quick, restrained, but felt. "You'll have your hands full," he said, snapping his gloves. "Storm brewing out past the draws." "Storms don't ask permission," she answered, surprising herself with how easily the words came. His smile was the quiet kind that made a person trust the ground under them. Then he was gone, the door closing on a sudden rush of cold and the distant, rising clatter of hooves. Clara worked. It helped. Work put bones back into a life that grief had turned to ash. She scrubbed, kneaded, ladled, listened to the house itself, the settling timbers, the faint hum of heat in the stovepipe, and matched her breathing to it. By noon, she had the kitchen clean enough to see her reflection in the kettle. The woman in the metal looked older than the weeks since the fire allowed, but there was color in her cheeks again. Deeper in the glass, she thought she saw something else, a thin, stubborn, bright line that wouldn't go out. Afternoons were for planning, for mending linens, for counting sacks of flour and jars of preserves. They were also for footsteps. Ethan had a way of appearing that was almost gentlemanly, hat off at the threshold, head ducked, though nothing else about him suggested he'd been raised anywhere but in the saddle. Sometimes he'd offer to repair a hinge. Sometimes he'd bring a split rail in from the yard and shape it by the hearth while she worked, the soft rasp of the draw knife like a second kind of breath in the room. He talked little about himself, and less about what lived behind his eyes. But stories leaked out the way water found seams in rock. A mother who sang through dust bowls until her voice was a dry whisper. A father who gambled luck away and went after it with a pistol. A boy who learned, too young, that the world kept ledger books and liked to balance them in blood. "You stayed," she said once, without meaning to. "After all that, you stayed kind." He paused with the knife in mid-stroke. "Kind and soft aren't the same," he answered, and the line of the rail shaved smooth. The rhythm of Iron Creek held until it didn't. The first fracture came quiet. Clara was hanging laundry behind the smokehouse when she heard voices drift from the barn's shadowed mouth. Pete Abernathy older, with rope scars across his hands, and young Lucas Finch, a narrow-shouldered boy who had more heart than sense, spoke low and fast. "Got it bad," Pete said. "You can tell because he's worse at pretending he doesn't." "Ethan? For the new girl?" Pete snorted. "Only fool in this yard who doesn't see it is the girl. Ward won't like it. Ward doesn't like anything until it proves itself useful." Clara's fingers clenched around the damp sheet. It wasn't the subject that startled her. The heat in her face told her she'd noticed the same tremor inside herself, but the way Pete said Ward's name, like a door barely held shut against a wind. That night a front rolled down off the ridges, cold as regret. The wind found every seam in the house. It moaned in the stovepipe and worried the porch boards like a dog gnawing bone. Most of the men's laughter stayed in the bunkhouse, where cards and whiskey fought weather better than quiet did. In the main house, only 2 lamps burned, the one in the study where Jedediah Ward sat with ledgers and letters, and the one in the kitchen where Clara traced her finger down supply lists and learned what a place needed to survive winter. Ethan appeared in the doorway, shoulders stacked with the tiredness of a man who had used up his muscles for honest reasons all day. "Don't burn your eyes out," he said. "Counting sugar," she answered. "Mr. Ward says we'll run light if the pass closes early." "Though, Ward's not often wrong about the world trying to kill you." Ethan stepped closer. The warmth that came with him wasn't just from the cold outside. It was from the attention of a person who had decided you mattered. "Ride with me tomorrow?" he asked, casual as a question could look and heavy as an iron brand under that look. "After morning chores, there's something to show you." "Is it trouble?" "Depends who's asking." "Ven." She thought of Pete's tone, of Ward's scales eyes, of the way her own heart tipped toward the space where Ethan stood. "I'll come," she said. They rode out along a fox trail that cut the edge of the north pasture, the air bright and brittle. White breath plumed from the horses. Snow had not yet decided to fall, but the sky was thinking about it. Ethan talked as they moved, not storytelling, exactly. Naming: Cottonwood Run, Widow's Bend, stone that looked like a kneeling horse. Clara repeated the names, as if learning a new alphabet. The land moved inside them both. They topped a rise, and the ground fell away into a scooped valley, with a long ribbon of water cutting its floor. Tucked close to the stream were timbers squared and stacked, not a house yet, but the idea of one, solid on a stone footing. A chimney base rose, patient, waiting for its own reasons to smoke. Ethan swung down and held his hand up to help her. The touch was nothing, a clearing of a fence, a courteous act until it was everything. She stepped into it. "It's not much yet," he said, the words coming out like someone admitting to hope. "But it will be. You built the foundation right," she said, kneeling to press her palm to the stone. "It won't shift when spring softens the ground." He crouched across from her, eyes brighter than the pale sky allowed. "I don't want a life that blows down." She looked up. For a second she saw the cabin complete, warm light leaking through chinks, a hook by the door holding a shawl that wasn't just hers, a table with 2 bowls. The image pricked tears into her eyes so fast she had to turn away and blame the wind. Clara. Her name in his mouth was a held breath. "I won't ask you for anything you're not ready to give. But I need you to know the direction I'm walking points here. If you ever find your boots pointing the same way." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. His hand, still braced on the foundation stone, trembled once and steadied. They rode back with silence that wasn't empty. It was a beam, bearing weight. That evening the mail coach came in on runners, sleigh bells jingling like a lie-pretty sound for hard news. Jedediah Ward, who did not believe in wasting daylight on sentiment, stood on the porch and slit envelopes with the tip of his knife. He called the names down the line, paper flicking from his hand like winter birds. When he said, "Miss Wynn," something tightened under Clara's ribs. The letter was addressed in a hand that had known education and money for a long time. The wax at the seal was rich like berries. She took it to the pantry, where flour sacks and dried apples made a kind of soft-walled room around a person who needed one. She broke the seal. "Miss Wynn, it is with both regret and urgency I write. Your father, Ellis Wynn, entered into several ventures with my firm prior to his death. Certain mineral rights have matured beyond my earlier expectations. As his sole heir, you are entitled to a sum that will lay a stronger foundation than any fire might destroy. If you would come to Helena at your earliest convenience, we can settle accounts, secure deeds, and advise the best course for your holdings. Yours faithfully, Lucian Hale. Hale and Merritt, attorneys and counselors." Clara's hands went cold. She read it again. The words did not change. The world did. A place to rebuild, a roof that belonged to her. Money enough to seed years with certainty, instead of fear. Except the scene that rose when she tried to picture rebuild was the blackened ruin by Willow Creek, and the room that grew in her mind, without effort, was not the old parlor. It was the half-built cabin on the Iron Creek stream bank. She pressed the letter to her chest and listened to the thud of her own heart. When she lifted her head, Ethan stood in the doorway. Not close, not far. The distance of a man who knew both how to step forward and when not to. If he'd asked first, if he'd reached for the letter, if he'd done anything but wait, perhaps her answer would have come easier. As it was, she held the paper out. He read quickly, face stilling into something between pride and caution. "I'm happy for you," he said finally. "Are you?" It came out sharper than she meant. "I am," he said. "I'm also a man who counts the cost of trails before he rides them. What trail do you see? You go to Helena, claim what's yours. You come back knowing what you want with clear eyes." He folded the letter carefully and gave it back. "If that's here, if that's with me, then I'll be the luckiest fool in Montana. If it's not, I'll still know you're safe. That matters." She should have thanked him for the grace. She should have said the simple truth, that safety mattered less than rightness, and rightness was getting tangled up with a man whose hands looked better stained with honest work than any inheritance would ever look in a bank ledger. Instead, she nodded, because the pantry felt small, and the walls made of flour and apples were closing in. Ward called her to the study later, as if the house itself were a judge and she a defendant. "I hear you've got business in Helena," he said, not looking up from his ledger. "Yes, sir. Money's poison when it's soft, good when it's hard. I don't. You won't know which kind you're holding until you've stared at it in daylight." He set his pencil down and finally looked at her. His eyes were not kind, but neither were they cruel. They were accurate. "Go see. Come back if it makes you better. Don't if it makes you small." Her breath shook on the way out. She did not like being measured, but she had come to trust the scale. Outside, the sky finally cracked and snow began in earnest fat flakes that fell as if the clouds were emptying out their sorrow. The ranch moved with storm speed. Tarps secured, stock checked, the bunkhouse windows caulked in a hurry. Night came early, and with it the kind of quiet that meant 1,000 noises were being smothered. Clara couldn't sleep. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and padded downstairs. The kitchen had the soft afterglow of a place that had served its duty well. The stove radiated a low, steady warmth. She heated milk and watched it steam. The door from the rear hall opened and closed. Ethan, snow in his hair, shoulders wet with melt, eyes bright with cold. He took in the milk, the shawl, the way she held the letter even now. "I told Ward I'd ride escort when you go," he said. "You don't have to." "I know." A small smile. "I want to." 1. They sat at the rough pine table with their cups and silence that was no longer frightening. The lamplight made a small gold circle between them. The house creaked around that circle like a ship bearing a long winter sea. "I'll come back," she said suddenly. The words surprised her and didn't. "Not because I owe it to anyone, because I want to see what this place becomes, what I become here." "What we become," he corrected gently. She met his eyes. For the second time that day, the world shifted on its axis. A thud from the porch stopped the rest of what she might have said. Not the clean double tap of a boot heel. A heavy drop, like a sack of grain, or a man too tired to stand. Ethan rose in one fluid line motion, palm low, not near his gun but near enough. He moved to the door and eased it open 2 inches. Lucas Finch stood swaying in the snow, his face bloodless, eyes huge. "Riders," he gasped, breath fogging like a white flag. 6, maybe 7. Saw 'em cut off the stage road down by Burnt Devil. They were asking at the Tilden way station about a woman going to Helena. Clara's cup rattled against the saucer. The milk that had soothed became cold in her throat. Ethan hauled Lucas inside and set him on the bench. "You didn't lead them here?" Lucas shook his head, swallowing hard. "Tracked me to the creek. Lost me when I crossed and doubled back by Widow's Bend." "No." Ward appeared as if the house had thought him into being. He took in the boy, the snow on the floor, Clara's white-faced stillness. "Cole? Men looking for a woman headed to Helena," Ethan said, "and not for her welfare." Ward's jaw worked. Hale wrote his letter on a Tuesday. He looked at Clara. "Stage comes Fridays. Plenty of time for some rat to read the post, sell what he knows." "The Tilden way station?" Ethan asked. "Old cavalryman and his wife," Ward said. "Fair. Not talkers. But coin buys mouths everywhere." He weighed what kind of storm was coming. "We can sit tight and let it blow past. Or we can move faster and smarter." He didn't have to say who we meant. The room's air rearranged itself into a plan. Ethan turned to Clara. "You ready to leave before dawn?" She thought of the half-built cabin, of the letters' smooth paper, of freedom and the price of it. "Yes." "Then we do it right," Ward said. "We set a table for a ghost. Zo. They stage the house for strangers, the kind who come looking to take. Lamps extinguished. Curtains left crooked, as if someone had left in a hurry. A trunk dragged across the floor to lay the long scrape of a fresh evacuation. In the bunkhouse, 10 men slept loud on purpose. In the barn, 4 horses were saddled in the far stall and covered with blankets and idle talk. Ward wrote a note addressed to no one and left it on the mantel. "Gone to Billings for supplies. Back when snow allows." It was a true enough lie to keep a hungry mind busy. Ethan packed small, jerky, coffee, matches, a map written in someone else's careful hand and corrected in his. He handed Clara a man's coat cut down by a woman who knew a needle. "This will hold better against the wind," he said. "How do we know they won't be waiting on the road?" she asked. "We don't," he said. "So we don't take the road." They left in the hour before dawn when even night is too tired to argue. Lucas, who had earned the right to be where courage was needed, rode ahead to scout. Pete came behind to erase tracks with a burlap drag tied to his saddle horn. Ethan rode beside Clara, close enough that if her horse stumbled, his hand could find her bridle in the dark. The world narrowed to hooves, breath, and the small, brittle music of ice crystals carried on wind. The land hid them because it was old, and had learned how. They crossed Iron Creek at a place where boulders broke the sound of water, and then angled east along a draw choked with black sagebrush. Behind them, far behind, and then not so far, the sound of other riders rose, not imagined, not wind. Men who wanted something that didn't belong to them. Ethan's voice came low and even. "When we reach the cottonwoods, we cut north to Tilden. They keep a line shack 3 miles beyond. We hole up there if the sky decides to fall." 1. As if the sky had been waiting for its cue, snow thickened mid-air like a curtain pulled. The horizon vanished. The horses tossed their heads and snorted steam. Clara bent forward over her mare's neck and spoke into her mane. "Brave girl, brave girl." She didn't know if she meant the horse or herself. They made the cottonwoods by guess and prayer. The creek there wired around a high ridge that in certain lights looked like a buffalo lying down. Ethan pointed, gesture sharp and quick as a knife. Lucas veered. Pete checked their rear. Clara heard a voice lift on the wind, rough, jeering, sure of itself. It called a name, not hers. Ethan's. "Cole, you got something belongs to us." Ethan's mouth flattened. He didn't answer. He urged his gelding up the first slope of the ridge. Clara's mare slipped twice and found purchase where no hoof had right to. At the crest, Ethan reined in and looked back. Figures moved in the pale, a darker gray against gray, the way a nightmare wore a face only after you woke up, remembering it. They dropped over the ridge and found the shack by luck or grace. It was a single room with a broken latch and a stove that looked like it had once been a barrel. Pete had a fire lit in 3 breaths and a guard posted in 4. Lucas melted into the storm. Clara's hands shook as she helped Ethan strip the horses and bring them inside the shack, 2 beasts turned into furniture by winter's law. The room was instantly too small, but also the exact size of the hope they could afford. "How long?" she whispered. "Long enough," he said, and drew her into the circle of heat, like he'd been made for that job since God thought of wind. He did not say, "I will protect you." He did not say, "Trust me." He put his body between hers and the door and let the words live in that simple geometry. Outside, the storm opened its throat and howled. Inside, the fire said 3 things over and over. "Live, live, live." Clara rested her palm against Ethan's chest and felt the steady drum there answer. For the first time since the fire at Willow Creek, she believed the future could be something she built rather than something that happened to her. The belief lasted until a fist hit the shack door hard enough to rattle the bar. A voice followed, slant and smiling. "Evening, folks. Heard tell there's a lady here bound for Helena. Thought we might offer her a ride." Ethan's hand found hers and tightened once, a message, a vow, a warning, and then let go so he could stand. She rose with him, a woman who finally understood that the definition of home was not a place, but a line you decided to hold. "Open up," the voice sang, "or we make our own key." The next blow splintered wood. The storm screamed. The latch held. For now, the door splintered on the 3rd blow. Snow swirled into the shack like smoke from another fire, carrying with it the shapes of 3 men wrapped in frost and greed. Ethan shoved Clara behind the stove, drawing the revolver Ward had pressed into his palm hours before. "Stay low," he whispered. The first bandit stepped through the shattered doorway, a scarred brute with eyes as pale as ice chips. He grinned when he saw Ethan. "Told you he'd have company," he muttered to the others. "And she's worth more than what's in her saddlebag." Ethan fired before the grin finished forming. The man went down, crashing into the snow like a felled tree. The shot was swallowed by the blizzard, but the fight that followed was loud enough to wake the dead. The second man lunged from the side, striking Ethan's arm with a clubbed rifle butt. Pain exploded through his shoulder. He staggered, fired again, missed. Clara, trembling but furious, snatched a kettle from the stove and hurled boiling water into the attacker's face. He screamed, clawing at his skin. Ethan used the moment to kick the door shut with his heel and drag the heavy bench across it. The third man fired through the boards, the bullet ripping past Clara's ear. She screamed. Ethan turned, eyes gone cold. "Stay down." He fired twice more. Silence followed except for the wind outside. Howling like a wolf denied its meal. When it was over, Clara pressed herself against the wall, shaking, her hands covered in soot and blood. Ethan stood over the bodies, chest heaving. He looked older than she'd ever seen him, older and lonelier. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, though her body told another story. "Then we move." They pushed the bodies aside, grabbed what supplies they could carry, and vanished into the white wilderness before dawn could find them. They rode without speaking, the world reduced to snow and breath and the rhythmic creak of saddle leather. By midday the storm had calmed, but the air remained knife-cold. Clara's fingers were numb despite Ethan's gloves. Every time she blinked, she saw the men's faces, one falling, one burning, one bleeding. "Ethan," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "They knew my name." He didn't answer at first. When he did, it was a truth too sharp for comfort. "They weren't just bandits. Someone paid them to bring you in alive." "Alive?" He met her gaze. "Dead folk don't sign inheritance papers." The realization cut deeper than the cold. Her father's fortune, her second chance, had become a bounty on her head. By dusk they reached a narrow canyon lined with red cliffs that caught the last of the sun like smoldering iron. Ethan led the horses into a crevice barely wide enough for one person to pass at a time. Inside lay a hollow where wind couldn't reach. They built a small fire with pine branches and huddled close. Clara's teeth chattered so hard she could barely speak. "You killed for me," she whispered. "I killed because they would have taken you. But it's the same thing." He didn't argue. He simply stared into the fire, the flames painting his scarred cheek in gold and shadow. "You think less of me now?" he asked quietly. "No," she said. "I think you've already paid for more sins than I ever will." "No." That night, sleep came only in fragments. Every sound, the snap of wood, the sigh of wind, felt like footsteps. Somewhere deep in the canyon, a wolf howled, long and low. Ethan's arm came around her almost without thought. She didn't move away. The next morning dawned clear. Helena was 2 days' ride, if luck held. It didn't. By afternoon they found themselves facing a river half frozen, too wide to cross safely. The current roared beneath plates of ice that shifted like glass. "We'll lose time going around," Ethan muttered. "Then we risk the crossing?" Clara asked. He studied the river, calculating, then nodded. "We'll go slow. Stay close." They led the horses one at a time, testing each step. The ice groaned. Halfway across, Clara's mare panicked, hooves slipping. The ice gave way with a scream of breaking glass. "Clara!" The freezing water swallowed her. The shock stole her breath. The current dragged at her skirts. She flailed, caught a glimpse of Ethan diving in after her. Then the world turned white and silent. Strong arms wrapped around her, pulling, lifting. She coughed up river water and gasped for air. They collapsed together on the far bank, shaking violently. Ethan's lips were blue. "You idiot," she rasped, tears freezing on her lashes. "You could have drowned." He smiled faintly. "Wouldn't look good, leaving a lady half frozen in my care." She laughed, a cracked, desperate sound that turned into a sob. She pressed her forehead to his chest, feeling his heartbeat like a promise that refused to die. By nightfall they reached a way station near Helena, a lonely cabin manned by an old woman named Martha Gray, who looked like she'd outlived every storm the territory could throw. She took one look at them and said, "You've got death on your boots. Best wash it off before you track it in." They obeyed. Inside, the warmth felt unreal. Martha gave them blankets and stew, muttering about the price of trouble. Ethan stayed alert, his gun never far. Clara noticed how his eyes scanned the windows, how his body leaned slightly toward her, as if the distance between them was a risk he refused to take. That night, Martha handed Clara a folded newspaper. "You might want to see this." On the front page, under Helena Gazette, was the headline, Heiress to win mining fortune missing reward offered for safe return. Beneath it, in smaller print, contact Mr. Lucian Hale, attorney of record. Clara stared until the letters blurred. He offered a reward. Ethan took the paper from her trembling hands. He's drawing them in. You think Hale's behind this? He nodded grimly. He knew when you'd come. He knew the stage route. Those men weren't guessing. Clara's voice hardened. Then I'll face him myself. You'll do no such thing, Ethan said, stepping closer. You'll stay here while I— No, she interrupted. I'm done hiding behind men who fight my battles. For a long moment, they glared at each other, two storms colliding. Then Ethan sighed, the fight leaving him. You're right, but you're not going alone. At dawn, they rode into Helena under a veil of pale fog. The city rose from the valley like a promise, church spires, rail lines, and the sound of hammers building a new world on the bones of the old one. Outside the law offices of Hale and Merritt, Ethan dismounted and handed her a folded note. If I'm not out in 10 minutes, you ride north. Don't look back. 10 minutes? She said. What are you planning? Something polite, he said and smiled. He entered first. Hale's office smelled of leather and ink and expensive whiskey. The lawyer rose, a man too polished for frontier dust. Mr. Cole, he greeted smoothly. And Miss Wynn, I was beginning to worry. You knew where we were, Ethan said flatly. My dear boy, information travels fast when it's valuable. I'm relieved you both survived. Truly. Clara stepped forward, slamming the Gazette onto his desk. You sent them. Hale's smile didn't falter. You misunderstand. I offered a reward for your safe return. The men who found you must have misinterpreted my instructions. Ethan's hand drifted toward his holster. Save the lies. Mr. Cole, Hale said lightly, you're not in a saloon. This is the law. Out there, Ethan said. The law's just a word with a price tag. Hale's eyes cooled. You forget yourself, sir. Clara's voice cut through the tension. He forgets nothing. My father trusted you. You turned his trust into bait. Hale spread his hands. And yet, here you stand alive, ready to claim what's yours. I call that a success. She stepped closer, her fury shaking. You'll release every cent into my name, and you'll do it now. Hale studied her, calculating, dismissive, then cautious when he saw Ethan's expression. Of course, he said smoothly. Let's sign what needs signing. When it was done, he offered her a thin smile. I do hope you'll remember who made this possible. She looked him straight in the eye. Oh, I will, when the sheriff asks who hired a pack of killers. Hale's face drained of color. You wouldn't dare. Try me, she said. They left the office in silence. Outside, snow began again, soft flakes drifting down like absolution. You did it, Ethan said. No, she whispered. We did. They walked to the edge of town where their horses waited. Clara turned to him. What now? Now, Ethan said, smiling faintly. We build something no one can steal. She stared at him for a long moment, then reached into her coat and pulled out the bank draft, everything her father's name was worth. She tore it clean in half. Ethan's eyes widened. Clara, I'm done living by what men leave behind, she said. We'll build from the ground up, our own foundation. He laughed softly, a sound full of wonder. You really are fire, aren't you? Only when someone lights the match. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. Above them, the snow fell thicker, the city fading into white behind them as they rode toward the horizon, their tracks vanishing as quickly as they were made. Neither looked back, because some stories aren't about what you inherit. They're about what you decide to build. And who's willing to stand beside you when the storm comes again? By the time they left Helena behind, the wind had softened, and the mountains blushed under a sun just strong enough to turn snow into mist. The danger, the greed, the smoke of guns, all of it, fell away mile by mile until only the steady rhythm of hooves and heartbeats remained. For the first time since the fire, Clara breathed without flinching. Each exhale carried away a piece of the past. The draft she had torn in half still rustled in her pocket, 2 scraps of paper worth a fortune, now useless except as proof that she had chosen her life instead of letting it be chosen for her. Ethan rode beside her, his hat tipped low, his face unreadable in the morning glare. But there was a looseness in his shoulders she hadn't seen before, a peace that came not from safety but from knowing what mattered. "Do you ever regret the fights you don't finish?" she asked suddenly. He glanced her way, a corner of his mouth lifting. "Only the ones that weren't worth starting." They shared a small laugh that felt like sunrise breaking open after a long night. By dusk, they reached the valley where his unfinished cabin waited. Snow still blanketed the frame, but the timbers stood firm dark lines against a pale world. Smoke rose from the little stove Pete and Lucas had left burning for their return, and a horse whinnied softly from the corral. Ethan swung down and offered her his hand. "Welcome home, Miss Wynn." She took it. "It's Miss Wynn only until the next Sunday." He froze for a second, then turned to face her fully. "That a proposal?" "I believe it's an acceptance," she said, smiling, "of one that's been waiting since Iron Creek." He let out a breath that misted in the cold and then gathered her into his arms. "I'll fetch the preacher from Pinneridge. You can't start a ranch without a wedding, or without a name," she murmured, glancing at the mountains glowing gold in the distance. "What should we call it?" He looked over the land, its scars, its promise, its open sky, and said softly, "Phoenix Ranch, for what rose from the ashes." Her throat tightened. "Then let's make sure it never burns again." They worked side by side in the days that followed, laying floorboards, cutting lumber, setting stones around the hearth. Their laughter mingled with the sound of hammer and saw, the rhythm of two people remaking themselves with every nail. At night they sat before the new fire, too tired to talk but too content to need words. Sometimes Ethan would reach for his guitar, old, battered, missing a string, and hum, a song so low and rough it felt like the land itself was singing through him. Clara would listen with her head against his shoulder, eyes closed, letting the warmth seep through every part of her that had once been cold. One evening, as they watched the stars spark to life, she whispered, "I used to think I'd never belong anywhere again." Ethan glanced down at her, his voice quiet. "Maybe belonging isn't something you find. Maybe it's something you build piece by piece, with someone who won't let you quit." She smiled, tears glinting in the firelight. "Then we're building something stronger than any storm." Weeks later, the first buds of spring crept over the valley. The snow melted into rivers that fed the land, and grass pushed through the thaw like green fire. The cabin was finished, now a real home. The corral stood mended, the barn half built, and from the porch you could see the world unfold for miles. They were married under a wooden arch woven with wild roses and prairie sage. Ward rode in from Iron Creek to stand as witness, his stern eyes suspiciously bright. Lucas and Pete brought barrels of cider, and Martha Gray arrived with a loaf of sweet bread that could have fed an army. When the vows were spoken, Clara felt the tremor of her old life finally settle into stillness. Ethan slipped a simple band of silver onto her finger, a ring that would never glitter like the jewels of Helena, but would never lose its shine. Afterward, as the guests drifted home and twilight wrapped the valley in soft blue, Ethan stood beside her on the porch. His arm found her waist with the ease of something long promised. "Happy?" he asked. She looked out over their land, the fences stretching like lines of promise, the river gleaming faintly in the distance, the cabin glowing warm against the dark. "More than I ever imagined possible," she said. He smiled. "Good, because tomorrow we start breaking ground for the barn." She laughed, leaned up, and kissed him. "And after that?" "After that," he said, his voice low, "we build everything else." That night, long after the lanterns were blown out, the wind moved softly around the cabin, whispering through the cracks of the new walls. It carried the faint scent of pine smoke, and something sweeter, hope, perhaps, or the ghost of old dreams finally laid to rest. Inside, the fire burned steady, bright but gentle. No longer a destroyer, but a keeper. And outside, beneath the endless western sky, Phoenix Ranch stood waiting proof that from ruin, love could rise again, fiercer and more unbreakable than before. Months passed. Spring gave way to the long gold of summer, and the valley that had once been silent began to hum with life. Cattle grazed along the creek. The sound of a hammer echoed from the new barn where Lucas whistled off-key, and Pete cursed at a mule that refused to move. The scent of wild roses mingled with hay and smoke, a perfume that belonged only to this land. From the porch of Phoenix Ranch, Clara watched Ethan ride back from the north pasture, sunlight glancing off his hat brim. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, his jaw shadowed, and yet she thought she'd never seen a man look more at peace. The boy who had once been hunted by ghosts was now a builder of tomorrows. When he dismounted, she met him halfway. "Fence hold?" she asked. "For now," he said, smiling. "Like us." He reached into his coat and pulled out something small, her father's gold watch, its face cracked but still ticking. "Found this under the saddle trunk. Guess time keeps going whether we're ready or not." Clara closed her fingers around it. "Then let's make sure we use it well." As dusk settled, they sat together on the porch, their shoulders brushing, the world stretching wide and endless before them. The cabin behind them glowed like a lantern against the coming night. Ethan turned toward her. "Do you ever think about that night? The fire?" "Sometimes," she said, "but not the way I used to. It doesn't burn anymore, it just lights the road that brought me here." He smiled at that, the kind of smile a man keeps for the one thing he knows will last. When the first star appeared, Clara took his hand. "You know what I think?" "What?" "That maybe love isn't about what saves us. It's about what we build after we're saved." He drew her close, his voice a whisper against her hair. "Then, Mrs. Cole, we'd better keep building." There, the wind carried their laughter across the valley, where it mingled with the rustle of grass and the low murmur of the creek, the living music of a place reborn from ruin. And long after the light faded, the cabin at Phoenix Ranch stood warm against the dark, proof that even in the unforgiving West, some fires were meant to last forever.